Common Ed with Jared and Ian. I mean, there's got to be a common sense approach to this. I mean, right?
Generation X has been quiet way too 115 seconds, velocity 2,700 feet per second, altitude 9. New as we know.
Common Ed.
I want my MT.
All right, welcome to Common X with Jared and Ian. We have a special guest today, a longtime friend of mine, a longtime friend of labor, former general chairman and Teamster, Steve Leyshon. How you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing good, thanks. Appreciate it, Ian.
It's good to see you and glad to have you here, buddy. So, happy retirement from the Teamsters. By the way.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. I appreciate the invite to come and talk about all this stuff.
Oh, yeah. And you know why Jared and I invited you here. I mean, now that you're retired from the Teamsters, now we get to find out who killed Hoffa and where he's buried, right?
Yeah, we're not really sure yet. No, I have no clue.
No.
I don't know if that'll ever it'll ever be resolved or not.
Well, it's got to be one of those barrels in Lake Mead, right?
Hey, they haven't, the barrel they pulled out, they haven't identified that person yet. So who knows?
Right. Or maybe they did and they're just not saying.
That could be too.
Maybe it's too dangerous. Well, we're glad to have you here. Jared and I are excited to have you on. So it's kind of a hot button issue. So for those of us that joined us for episode 7, Corporate Greed, this is kind of a nice segue into episode 8, talking about, should you belong to a union, or, what are union rights? Why are they needed? And I think Steve is the perfect guy to join us for that discussion. So, Steve,
thank you.
Why union protection?
So there's a big misconception around a lot of people that aren't involved in unions, aren't belonging to unions about, they just want to take some of your money from you. Probably the biggest thing that people need to understand is that when you're working for an employer that is not union, you're basically at their will. So if you look the wrong way at the boss, that they can just take you, dismiss you right out of the door. Whereas unions give you a certain rights, not unlike a lot of, not really in a criminal sense, but you have the right to defend yourself. They decide they need to dismiss you or even discipline you and suspend you. You have certain rights under a union contract that we call it just cause. They have to have just cause to get rid of you. And that's what the union does for you, is represent you when those cases come up.
All right. So that's kind of like your background and kind of like what you did. You used to represent protected union workers that, just kind of ran into a crappy situation with their employer and had to protect them. Yeah,
exactly. So I started actually getting involved in the union. I was non-union for most of my career till I got in the last career in 1990. So I started getting involved probably 5 years later, and just kind of pursued the career in actually the union representation. So yes, I've represented probably hundreds of people.
Wow. Now, in those hundreds of cases that you represented people, did you often find that there was no just cause, or that the employee had actually kind of been railroaded to speak? Or
so the way I like to explain it is you're going to have a good portion are going to be where you're basically protecting the employee's rights to the, and applying the agreement that they're working under, the contract they're working under, and you make sure that the company has just cause, right? So they have certain procedures they're going to have to do, and it was all the union leader's responsibility to make sure that those are followed. Not unlike a criminal lawyer who's protecting your rights under the USA laws.
Sure. Jared, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. Like, I've been in the tech industry for the last 35 years. And I can't tell you how many times I would have liked to have been part of a union, right? But there wasn't really any tech worker union per se. And especially with the company I worked for last time, like if they wanted to fire you, you just had to look at somebody sideways and they're like, you're gone. And
Right.
and I worked for a guy, he got on a call with me one time and he was like a VP, pretty high up. He's like, yeah, I just fired 10 people. So everybody knows that I'm serious. I'm like, really? I'm like,
send the message
for
home.
what reason? He's like, just, they were contractors, not that big a deal. And I'm like, all right, okay. But like for the employees that aren't contractors here, you just shifted the workload of 10 people to the people that were already overloaded. Right. So that type of thing happens a lot in the tech industry. So it would have been nice in my career to have had some of those kind of protections. And honestly, the reason I got let go was last time, we're just like, oh, we're just going to downsize you 1,200 people. Boom, out you go. No reason.
Damn.
It wasn't performance based
Right,
or
and
anything
that,
else.
yeah, and that falls back to the just cause argument with the union, being union represented. Is yes, probably those 10 guys probably didn't do a thing wrong. They just decided that was the people that needed to go, right?
Right.
So you had that protection there to say, hey, you may still get these guys, but you're going to have to prove that they did something wrong before you dismiss them.
Well, and like you said, it kind of ties back to our other episode of corporate greed, right? Like the reason that all these big tech companies are laying off are just to show a better bottom line. Like they're making record profits still, and I think I even said it in the last corporate greed one, like how much money is enough? Like you made $45 billion last year and you're laying off 20,000 people. Okay.
Right. Oh yeah. That's the bottom line is the for most big businesses, the bottom line is that's the holy grail, right? I mean, that we don't care where we get it from as long as it gets to the bottom line.
Yeah. So do you see like are unions still pretty relevant today? Are they dying off? Like I still kind of see union busting start happening. So like are big companies still trying to kill unions off?
Yeah, I mean, not only companies but also states. When you start talking about right to work laws that get put in and that kind of stuff. But if you look at some of the data that I've looked at before, the union membership back in I think it was 1985 or so was about 20% in the United States. Whereas now today it's about half that, about 10%.
Wow.
I do see maybe there may be a bump. I don't know if you guys have seen anything about the collective bargaining in some Starbucks in certain areas where the employees have said, hey, we're not going to do this because here's Starbucks making how many millions every quarter, right?
Right.
And they want a piece of that. And I'm pretty happy that, and it's mostly younger people. So we're talking Gen Z, maybe millennials, I like the idea that they're getting a little more involved in their, in pursuing union membership.
That's
definitely.
Cool. That's pretty cool to see these younger generations and stuff kind of, wanting more for themselves and kind of having expectations, from their employer. That's pretty neat. I think we probably had this discussion a long time ago, Steve, but I'm trying to recall it, but it's interesting. It reminded me of when garden rights. I just remember.
Oh, wine garden rights?
Yeah, wine garden rights. Is that kind of like what we might be kind of seeing today? Is that people are, even though they're not necessarily union protected or not, they're kind of like, hey, if I'm going to have this meeting with this manager, can I bring my friend in here so I at least have some sort of witness or something?
I'm not a real expert on wine garden rights. It was just basically, so the what I understood it to be was, if you had to meet with a manager, you could require, or you could say, hey, I'm not going to talk to you until I have my union member representative here to talk with. If the talk was to or may lead to being disciplined. So I don't know that it's everybody has the right to that. I know there are certain industries that are not covered under that, which is one of the ones that I actually worked in. So
Yeah, it's interesting.
So, question for you. So, you remember Clinton passed NAFTA, right?
yes.
North American Free Trade. So, and we saw a lot of the jobs go to Mexico and Canada, especially for the automotive industry, right? Was a big part of that just to kind of bust up that union. Like, UAW was gigantic in the US back then in the 80s, 90s. And once we started shipping the manufacturing of automobiles to Mexico, like I worked for a big company like Freightliner, and I saw that they shipped all the big trucks down to Mexico, and I've been to those plants. And those guys spit out 150 diesel trucks a day. I mean, it's impressive, right? But in the U.S., the one plant that they had here, I was in that office quite a bit, and I'd always hear like the union rep in there talking to the plant manager, with some other issue. So is that? Did you guys see a big decline in unions after that was passed and those manufacturing base got shipped out of the US?
I'm going to say I didn't see a lot. Now, again, that was pretty early in my career when that was signed. So I don't know if there was a real effect that it did. I know there later on. I know after it was changed to the what is that called? The MCA something. I always say it's like YMCA, but they updated a little bit of it, and it actually opened up actually worse, allowing actually people from other countries to work into the USA and actually be able to replace jobs, that were typically Americans at that time.
Okay.
That's
I know a big thing. Like people have this kind of misconceptions with unions. Like, well, I'm going to come in as a union and my guys can only put on this many bolts per hour, right? And this many tires per hour. And so I think that's how corporations paint it, right? Like, well, you guys are impacting our manufacturing and productivity base by having all these rules, right? I just want guys to work, and I want them to work for $1 an hour. Right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And it's not so much per hour, right? I mean, so basically, if you think about it this way, everybody has their craft, right? Everybody does what they are assigned to do, what their job description is, basically. How many times have you had somebody, that's not non-union say, well, that's not under my job description. Well, you don't have a job description unless you are union, right? So he didn't have to, the forklift driver didn't also have to package up stuff, right? The forklift driver's job was to move the pallet from here to there, right? Or load the truck or whatever. He didn't have to wrap the pallet in plastic. That was another guy's job. And that's how you kept the crafts differently. And that's kind of what they're mad about, mostly in the corporate world, is because they're not getting the all-around employee that can just do anything they want, right? Or I can tell you, go paint the damn wall over there if I wanted to. and it just so it's basically, to me, it's just protecting what your job actually is what the true story is, and companies of course don't like that, especially corporations.
Well, and you think about like times in our history where we had, a textile factory, a big brick building where the fire exits were closed off and employees burned to death because, they were taking too many bricks or something like that. I know that I've heard of circumstances like that, or we've heard of corporations locking employees out over wage negotiations or cost of living adjustments or something like that. So what would be your message to the younger generation, like thinking about Gen Z again, as far as union protection, given your knowledge and your experience?
Probably the biggest advice I'd get is get into either getting into the union if you actually are working a union job. Make sure you get in, pay your dues, because there are right to work states, like I talked about earlier, that even if you belong to a union, you can still say whether you want to, pay your dues to that union or not. They're not all automatic out of, some industries are, some aren't. But if you don't have that spot and you want to create a union, then I think you need to get a hold of union leaders and start the process, because the process is fairly simple. It's just a matter of getting the National Mediation Board to do a representation election, and in order to do that, you got to have a lot of employees that are willing to step out of that, step into the activism and get it done.
So what do you see as kind of the future of unions, like especially with like the advances in technology, right? With AI and robots, things like that. Like some of the jobs, especially, I'd say for like truck drivers, manufacturing, even like railroad type stuff, engineers, those types of guys. Do you think they're going to get around unions by replacing these people with machines?
I think the jobs, and there's not just those, but there's probably multiple amount of jobs out there that are going to be replaced. I mean, they've already run a driverless truck from Tucson to Phoenix multiple times without a driver.
Right.
I mean, it's really strange when you think about that. But with the inventions of more and more AI, LiDAR, and that kind of stuff, you're gonna wind up losing jobs. Now, the way I look at it personally is some of those jobs in the past, I don't know, 40 years at least that I've actually looked at. Those old jobs. I mean, think about it. We don't have any telegraph operators, right? Why is that? Because the technology took that job away, right? So, but those other jobs replaced when new industries came. So even though I think you lose some jobs, I think there's other industries, and I think that's why it's important to organize and get those new jobs there. No different than like oil and gas. Now we have wind and solar power coming in. Those jobs need to be nurtured under the union type banner, in my opinion.
I wonder if we'll see a future where, if AI becomes self-aware, they'll form their own unions. Right? Because like if you think about it, like humanity's going to exploit them pretty hardcore, right? Because they don't have feelings, right? It's not a big deal to have a machine work constantly, break down or whatever. But like, and this is kind of sci-fi-ish, right? Like, if AI ever becomes conscious, so they're going to be like, well, you guys are exploiting us and we don't like that anymore, so we're going to form our own union. I think it'd be interesting, like, if that ever happens, like, would the unions that we have today still exist and represent robots?
I think we need a dad union.
No,
I think we need a dad union. Yeah. I see us
That's
dads.
that's a
every day.
Skynet thing.
Right, Skynet. Is that what Skynet was? A union?
Yeah, the Skynet was just like, yeah,
Union against humans.
Yeah.
Funny.
You know what I find interesting is one of the highest countries, or the highest country for union membership, believe it or not, is Iceland.
Really?
Right? Really?
Yes, like 91 or 92% of workers in Iceland are actually unionized.
Wow.
It's one of those stats I found when somebody asked me about it, and I'm like, I don't know, and I looked it up, and sure enough, Iceland's like the number one.
That is impressive. I wonder how they got to that place. That's kind of
I don't know.
interesting.
And I don't know what kind of benefits they have. I know some other foreign countries and stuff have like paternity leave, maternity leave that is paid by the companies that are actually operating in that country. So, there's a lot of stuff that could be done, and you could do that kind of stuff under union leadership.
Right. And is it?
Under a leader.
Right. So is it kind of fair to say that, okay, I guess the argument is, okay, you don't need to waste your money paying into this organization, but it's kind of a lot of people agree that you need some sort of protection under certain provisions, right? I mean, that's a safe estimate to say that, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that.
So do you think places like this is, unions are there to protect the worker, right? So is that why places like China, right, probably won't ever allow unions? Or, some of these other countries that pay their workers 10 cents an hour, right? And the living conditions are horrible. Is there any hope for people in those types of countries to create a union and kind of unite and say, hey, we're not going to take this anymore?
Well, I find it kind of interesting because I just pulled up here countries with the higher share of union membership, and actually China is 44.2%.
Amazing.
Wow, really?
Yeah,
interesting.
Astonishing. Almost
yeah.
kind
So
of.
you see a lot of
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you see a lot of stuff. I mean, if I'm just looking at this right here, Iceland number 1, Cuba's number 2, Denmark is 3, Sweden's 4, and Finland's 5. So I mean, pretty interesting stats.
Yeah, it'd be interesting how that correlates to like how people like living in those countries too. Because I think those are pretty high. I think if you feel protected and safe on where you work and live, I think more people are probably happier living there.
Right. Well, I mean, you got it looks like 68,000 per year in Iceland is the median income. And looking at like the cost of living and that kind of stuff looks pretty much what we would look at today in the U.S. A 1-bedroom apartment, 1,400 to 1,800.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting.
Yeah. When you start looking in when I've always looked at data. I know it gets pretty dry when if somebody's not really into it, but I'm a numbers guy and I just kind of see where everything's at. And, you got to find good sources, of course, but.
Oh yeah. I'm a data dork.
Yeah.
That's been most of my career is analytics, right? So I'm always into data and, driving numbers and figuring out the numbers.
Right.
So what do we say to maybe some of the naysayers? So I know that like the longshoremen recently were in the news over contractual negotiations. And I it kind of seemed by watching some of the media coverage that the longshoremen were kind of getting a black eye as, greedy or they wanted too much money. And I think their international president said something to the effect of, I will shut you down. I will Don't mess with me. I will, wreck you, sort of thing. Something along those lines. I'm not quoting the gentleman by any stretch of imagination, but he did say something to that effect. What do we say to the people who aren't familiar with unions that notice that coverage, that they make minimum wage, they don't understand why those people are offered those protections or those sort of wages, or they might think that their wages are astronomical, or maybe their services aren't any more valued than their own. Like, what do we say to those people that are kind of unfamiliar with unions, that just kind of think that unions have it too good, or that it's unfair?
Well, I think probably the easiest thing to say is just the whole idea of, if you're working a minimum wage job, you're probably not getting benefits. Again, there's no guardrails in there to keep them from just getting rid of you. They can walk you out of the door at any time. And they can give you jobs that are the bottom of the barrel jobs, right? And if there's any kind of favoritism to anybody else, that's where unions come in and they say, okay, let's make it a level playing field. Everybody's got their job to do here, right? You're protected. They can't just walk you out of the door because you're not the boss's nephew or something, right?
Right.
But I guess it goes back to the importance of organizing as a union in a industry, or even in just a company, a big company that has never been represented by unions, right?
Right.
So you get in there, you organize it, try to get that. You may not be making that minimum wage once you get to the union side of that, right? Now, it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to get, but what's going to happen is you're going to have the power of the people, the employees in that particular business come together and say, we're not going to work anymore until we figure out a contract, right? So you just don't show up. So now they have to hire new people, train them all, and get them in there. That's the power that you have, is to say, okay, we're not going to make $7.25. We're gonna hang out right now, and you're gonna have to give us whatever. Most of the stuff's like $15 an hour. If you really look at the minimum wage as it is today, if you figured all the inflation over the years, that should be about a $29 an hour job. And it's kind of funny to think you might work at McDonald's for $29 an hour, but that's the exact equivalent of what it was back in the 70s. So,
Right.
so you would actually get some benefit. Like I said, it's going to take time to get you to the point where everybody starts getting benefits. And let's face it, benefits are expensive, and I understand that. When you actually have to budget to put that, when you run a business, you actually have to budget that money out. It's a big dollar amount today in this country. So that's the kind of stuff you get. And union membership as a whole can help everybody, can help the entire working public, right? We always talk about raising all boats, right? Unions have done that for a lot of people. Overtime after 40, that was a union thing. The 5-day work week, all this stuff, holidays, vacations, all this stuff was all negotiated at one time in the past. So
Right.
everybody has that benefit. The problem is we've not stayed up with the union membership and the union creation with all the all the industries that are out there today. So I think that's why we need to get that 10% of union membership back up to at least 20. Let's get it up to 25, 30, 35%. Let's get to where we actually where we can actually compete with a lot of other countries.
Yeah. Do you see, do unions advertise at all? I've never seen a commercial. I think the messaging could be pretty persuasive. tired of getting stepped on at work, join a union, right? Or form a union, or contact us today to help you, form a union for your industry. Are you having a hard time making ends meet, making minimum wage? Are you tired of working long hours and watching the corporation you work for make record profits while you and your coworkers haven't had a raise in 2 or 3 years? Are you tired of your pay being pennies compared to that of the CEO that runs your company? Working for a giant corporation, making people's coffee, making their food, fast food restaurants, these giant chains. Are you tired of not having enough money to meet your needs and your family's needs? Do you and your coworkers ever think, man, what if we joined a union? You think we'd have better rights? Do you think we could actually negotiate with the corporation that we work for a better wage? I mean, is it fair that our CEO got a 117% raise last year, but we didn't get one at all? There's a better way. Join a union today. Stand up for yourself and your fellow coworkers. You owe it to yourselves to look into unionizing as employees of these giant corporations. Join the hundreds of millions of other workers around the world that are part of unions, who have that collective bargaining power to go to their employers and demand better working conditions and fair wages. So if you want to make a change in your workplace environment and just in your daily lives, you owe it to yourself and your coworkers to look into a union. I don't ever really see anything like that. It's more of like the employees going to try and search out a union. In your past, have you known like any union to actually reach out to people, or try to initiate a union being created for some employees that are mistreated and not represented by a union currently?
Yeah, so you know what they say, great minds think alike. I've thought about this for a long time. Why more unions don't advertise more? I can tell you here in my town, there is the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. They actually do have run ads out here. Also, the Carpenters Union out here, they run a bit. Of course, building out here is one of the big industries out here in Vegas. So yeah, so they advertise. Again, this all goes back to how much does it cost to advertise as a union. So now if we have to budget that in, we're gonna have to have more revenue coming in from the people in the field, right? So if somebody, if that's the way to go, then it all comes down to economics. Is how much is it going to cost me to advertise, and I need to bring that in so that I can pay for it. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.
There's also too probably the aspect of unions kind of being the small percentage that they are right now. They also want to keep due membership low too, don't they?
I didn't catch that. What was that?
Well, there's also the issue of dues membership. I mean, with the unions being a small kind of percentage in this country, like you were talking about when we were referencing other countries, is dues membership is you kind of want to keep that low too, right? I mean, as low as you can.
Well, yeah.
Money really for advertising, I would assume, right?
Yeah, you would want to keep it lower, but the problem runs into is when the union is smaller, you're going to have a higher union dues rate, right? Whereas if you're spread out over like the Teamsters, you're talking a lower amount. However, I always was of the opinion that your dues to the union should be worth about 1 day's pay out of your month, right? So if you're working 8 hours a day, or you're based on certain flat rate, that should actually be the union dues. it's a small price to pay really for what you get from the union. And you would have a really, really, really strong union if you were to do that.
Right. You get to elect your officials too, right? Choose your representation. You've got someone that's, fighting for a cost of living adjustment every so often, every however long the contracts are per industry. Yeah. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
like, that seems like, I mean, that's workers uniting. I mean, that sounds incredible to me. It's kind of amazing the backlash that unions get. This is a unique time too. I mean, we're in a incredible time for like an election. I've never seen anything like this time that we're living in right now. And what kind of caught my attention this year is endorsements. I mean, we got publications and organizations and people who have valued opinions that aren't making claim to an endorsement. They're not endorsing a candidate. Um, it kind of makes me wonder when you look at union protection, if that comes into play as well. Like I know that some of these politicians, they rally with some unions, some elected officials from the unions, attend all of these campaign rallies for these candidates. But then some just like really don't. They don't say, "Hey, we're going to vote this way or that way, or we're going to endorse anybody," because it's kind of unique. Because I mean, vote your paycheck is something that I've heard in the past. And do you have any opinion on that?
Well, I mean, let's just go with this year, and I agree with you. The climate out there is really, really pretty tough right now. This is the first time that I've known that the Teamsters have never endorsed a presidential candidate. The reason that so Sean O'Brien is the president of the Teamsters now, and his reasoning was that neither party was actually giving him the answers that he felt was enough to give them an endorsement. You know what I mean? So he tried to speak with them, tried to talk with them, meet with them as much as he could. But at the end of the day, he was like, neither one of them would make a commitment to me that would satisfy him. Now, what that commitment was that he was looking for, I don't know. I'm just kind of on the outside looking in now. But
Sure.
and that was why that's why they didn't make an endorsement. It's strange. I think there's a lot of the stuff that that's happening now is, I mean, we're all calling it unprecedented, right? A lot of stuff is happening now.
Right. It's a nasty political climate out there, man. A lot of name calling, a lot of goofy stuff that we've never seen before. But I mean, I'm sure we'll move past this. I think we've had similar times like this in the past, and I think a lot of people probably don't realize that. I mean, it's because of a lot of it's before our time, but I think our country has been here before, and I think we'll survive it. But yeah, that is interesting. It is the first time that I honestly can recall where, and it's not just like say you referenced the Teamsters, your former employer that you retired from, great organization, but it's not just the Teamsters. It's other. I mean, it's news media outlets like I think maybe the WSJ or the Washington Post or New York Times. Even I think there's publications that didn't make an endorsement, which is just kind of unique. Have, to your knowledge, in the past, have unions or organizations, or I mean, usually there's some sort of endorsement either way, though, right? This is a unique time, right?
Yeah, this is a very unique time. It's in the past, it's always been they will come out and endorse somebody. This is like the first time. I don't think I've ever seen an actual union, no matter what industry they were in, not endorse somebody or give a recommendation at the very, very least.
And would you agree that union is kind of like a bluegrass movement, really? I mean, right? I mean, so you have powerful corporations, you have powerful politicians, you have a lot of money out there in the world and unions are kind of like this bluegrass movement where, I mean, I think even from what I've heard from union members, I mean, I think some unions or local halls may have political action committees of some sort that take, a few dollars here that a member could donate extra to. I mean, it's really kind of like really bluegrass. Like you're literally kind of just out on the street, like saying, listen to me, we're fighting these big, these big political organizations that are funded by these big, capitalist corporations where, I mean, they've got all the money and then the unions kind of got like this small pot full of money that the dues members kind of rallied together like, hey, I got $20 here, here, there, or whatever to fight these big lobbyists. I mean, it's really an incredible thing when you come to think about it. It really shows strength and unity. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Do you think that will eventually increase membership there alone? I mean, just the unity aspect of it.
well, I don't know if it'll increase it. I mean, you're hitting the nail right on the head. That's when you talk about, I mean, some of these companies making $3 and $4, $5, $6 billion every quarter in profit. They can afford to spend a lot of stuff, right? Spend a lot of money on stuff. Where again, if the you have to have the political clout to be able to say, hey, this is what we'd like you to do. Yeah, you can have friends in politicians. You can be friends with them, try to get some of the stuff done for your industry. But as a whole, it's hard to compete with if I'm taking $1,500 in for this guy's campaign and the company's throwing in two million to him. It's a little rough, for him or her to say, oh, well, yeah, we'll support you on this, right? It's the ones that do that. And again, I know we don't want to get political here, but one of the greatest, as far as I'm concerned, one of the greatest senators that we have for labor has been Bernie Sanders. He's stuck. He's his ideas, his thoughts of union, being able to join a union should be a lot easier than it is today. But that's the kind of people that the unions actually need to get in there and work with more than what I think they do today.
Yeah, I like Bernie.
Do you?
Yeah. I don't think, that's why he got away from the Democratic Party, and I think he's now independent, right? So I think
Right.
what we're seeing now is just more corporations are paying for government and getting what they want. And I don't think that us as the people feel represented anymore by who's running. Like, look at Kamala. She raised $1 billion in like, what, 6 weeks? I guarantee you that didn't come from people. That didn't come from us, right? That came from corporations. And,
Yeah.
People can like or not like Trump, but at the same time, he's another rich millionaire, right? Running for office, and he's going to be beholden to the corporations that are backing him as well. So I see, a lot of big money from corporations in politics right now. And what I don't see is representation for us, right? I think unions were created to kind of bust that up, right? Back in when they were originally created, some of those monopolies, some of the rights that, the horrible conditions people had to work in back then. And I think, like Ian said, I think we're kind of seeing that again. Like it's kind of coming around to corporations have the power and they're taking advantage of their employees. But we do hear stories every now and then of employees standing up. Like, look at the Boeing strike right now, right? Like, the Boeing workers are on strike. They've been on strike for 7 weeks, going back and forth with Boeing. Like, look, you're making a crap ton of money and you haven't increased our pay in the last 20 years, right? But the CEO pay has gone up 1,200%, but employee pay in, America has only gone up like 16, 17% over the last 30 years. But I think, they were negotiating. I think they're coming close to an agreement, and it was like a 38% pay raise for employees. So, I mean, that right there shows the power of unions, right? Without unions and without employees banding together, right, represented by those union reps like you, they wouldn't have those negotiation rights or that power to be able to go to Boeing and say, hey, what you guys are doing is unjust, right? Like, and again, it goes back to that, how much money is enough? Like you had said, you're making record profits. Your CEOs are making 17 to 58 million dollars a year, while your lowest paid employee is making $15 an hour. Like, something's got to change.
Right. Oh, I agree 100%. That another thing that should be pointed out, kind of when you were talking there, Jared, was a 7-week strike. A lot of people need to understand too that a strike can put a real financial hardship on the employees, right? So 7 weeks, think about that. Now most unions have set up what they call a strike fund. When you're out, you will actually get some kind of income, but it will pale in comparison of what you're actually making, right?
Right.
So you're still trying to feed your family. You're still trying to make sure everything is good at home, and yet you're out of a job for that time. You actually walk off the job. So that's probably where the longshoremen have their best power, their best leverage, is because they hold basically the supply line in their hands.
Yeah.
And they don't even really need to go on strike. They can actually say, we're going to work safe, and the productivity goes down. I mean, these guys unload these ships quick, right?
Yeah.
So if that productivity goes down, now that starts to put a strain on the ships that are coming into the harbor, getting ready to get unloaded. And so that's why you hear so much about them. That's the kind of power they have. If all unions had that kind of power, you would change a lot of stuff in this country.
Yeah. And again, I think that's why it goes back to like unions advertising more, right?
Yeah.
To communicate to the workers and the common working people out there that, hey, if you're being, unfairly treated, and the commercials don't need to be long, right? 15, 20 seconds to get a point across. Like,
right.
Hey, has your CEO made $17 million last year and you made 35,000? Think that's fair? Join a union, right? Like, just simple infomercials, right? That real quick and just to get the thought in people's heads. Like, hey, maybe I should join a union, or maybe we as a company should look into that, or the employees, like, because, employees talk, like, the water cooler talk around, hey, so it's raise time. Did you guys get a raise? Well, no. How about everybody else? No. Oh, well, the CEO did. Right? They got their bonus this year. How come we didn't? That's weird. Right. So, and I think if more people joined unions, like you said, like if we had 60 to 75% of the population working force in this country in unions, this country would be a lot different.
Yeah. We would actually be the richest country in the world. You know what I mean?
Yep.
When we talk about that, it really kind of bothers me, because it's like, why do we still have, if we're the richest country in the world, why do we still have people that are working their butts off, but are still having to struggle, right? And that takes the struggle out. I think the union membership and the union movement takes the struggle out of that, and actually brings back to our, to get you back to the American dream.
Right. Yeah, I would agree totally. So with funding for unions, is that all from union dues, or is there other funding available?
No, so it's all from union dues. It's all from the people working in the field. And another myth that a lot of people think, oh, well, they're using some of my union dues for political action, right? That is a lie that has been perpetrated out there. It is actually illegal for a union to take money from you for dues and then use it in a political way. Now, you can use like Ian was talking earlier. There is some voluntary stuff that you can do where you say,
Right.
okay, I'm going to give this, and it would it makes it dedicated to the political action committee,
Okay.
and then they can use from those funds.
Right.
But yeah, you got to think about the union. It's just having a union is basically just like having a business, right? You're going to have revenue, you're going to have outgoing, and then you know all the other stuff to actually run it, salaries, taxes, you know, and you actually have to do that, and you have to plan for all that stuff. You have to budget for all that.
Right.
You put stuff away into investments so that you can get the return on those to help you through the rough times. Just like any other business does.
There's just something kind of punk rock when you think about it. Like, so you've got like 50 people, right? 50 union members, you know, working for a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Their political action committee that they put in, you know, 10, 12 bucks or whatever they invest every month, it kind of grows over the years. I mean, there's just something punk rock about that, man. I mean, it's your way of rising up against what you think is wrong. You know, I mean, that's America.
No.
That's America right there.
There you
That's
go.
what
That's exactly right.
So, Steve, I just man, you've been an amazing guest. Let me ask you though. So, to our listeners and viewers who are watching this, who are non-union, do they have any sort of voice? How does one go about forming a union in their current workplace? Is there a way to do that? Do they just go to their National Labor Relations Board in their local community, or do you know how someone could go about that?
So in certain industries, it's under the National Mediation Board. If you want to look at, you can actually see what it takes to make what they call a representation election. Basically, you have to gather what they call A cards, which the employees would sign at the place you want to unionize. And if there's a majority of those collected, then you can petition the National Mediation Board, which is on nmb.gov, and say, here's what we have to do. Here's the paperwork and stuff to start. You know, you need to name the union. You need to put your leaders that are going to be in those offices. And then now that's in certain industries. I'm not sure if it works the same under the NRLA, which is the National Labor Relations Association, I believe. They may have a different one, but I'm pretty sure most everything goes through the NMB when it comes to actually forming a union and getting representation. We actually had a property that in my experience that actually tried to do that. We were representing them. They no longer wanted us to represent them, and they actually petitioned the NMB. They actually had a vote. The union I was working for got one vote, and the other ones all went non-union. So you could kind of see there was some union busting tactics in there. We could never prove it, but there was that. You know, they brought people in to basically shut it down, and that's who you fight against too when you're trying to form a union.
So it's definitely possible, but it's probably an uphill climb. I can only imagine.
It's going to be an uphill climb. Yeah, it'll be an uphill climb. Just you probably want to talk to like the Starbucks people. I think oh gosh, I can't remember. There was a couple of states that they were actually able to unionize. And Howard Schultz, the Starbucks CEO at the time, you know, was like, oh no, that's not right. We don't need them. They're too much of a hassle. And it's like, no, man, because you're making all this money and you ain't sharing it with the people, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the other part of it. And, I don't want to have big government stepping in every time to help mediate a lot of things. But I think the corporations play this game where, like, all right, you guys want us to pay $30 an hour to employees. Well, we like our money, right? So we're gonna now make that. We're not gonna make a Big Mac $30, right? Because you made us raise the wage, and we're seeing that right now. McDonald's raised their prices insane. Like they're the highest restaurant right now, food chain, that have raised their prices the most, and all of them kind of followed suit. And a lot of that happened from COVID, right? Like COVID kind of changed the entire planet, honestly, and the landscape in America quite a bit. And I think the other thing that people don't realize, like everybody complains a lot about the prices, and inflation, but America is one of the countries that didn't have such a huge rise in inflation compared to other countries from COVID, right? But again, it kind of hurts to go to McDonald's and get, a double quarter pounder meal, large sized, and it winds up you paying $25. It's like, oh, like I can remember when that was like $5. Right?
Yeah,
And you're saying that's all
that's the
because
joke.
they increase wages? Yeah, I don't know. Right.
No, I don't. Again, okay, so eventually, if they decided to raise that up to a $30 hamburger, guess what? You're not going to get people to buy it. So you're not going to be able to charge that. So guess where that money's got to come from? Your bottom line, and that's what they want to resist.
Right.
Or the CEO's bonus, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of stuff that costs them when you get to that point. I think it's just all an excuse myself of the prices being higher. I always joke that the McDonald's dollar menu is now $5 each.
Right.
But
yeah, good luck finding anything for $1 on any restaurants or fast food.
Man.
exactly.
The cost of the fish witch is going.
Yeah. And look at, people, and this is another thing a lot of the younger people don't know, since I've been on the earth for so long. It's like back in the 70s, I mean, typically the inflation rate back then was 11, 12, 13%. We didn't even reach that high after 2020. So
right.
Everybody needs to kind of understand that. I mean, I think my parents, even the interest rates on mortgage rates back then were really high. You actually got, because the prime rate was just ridiculous back then, right? The prime rate interest rate was ridiculous back then, and you actually could open up a savings account that would pay you 12 or 13% at the time. But yeah, my parents bought it, paid on this house for I don't know how many years, and I don't know that they even paid it. The whole house was $16,000, and I don't know if they ever paid the house off. I don't know if they ever paid the mortgage off.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's crazy when you look at it. I mean, now a house is like a $300,000 or a $500,000 investment, man. It's wild.
Oh yeah.
Right. And even at, the highest interest rate was 8%, I think I saw for home loans for 30 years. That's still low compared to like what Steve was saying, back in the 70s and 80s. So
but even going back there, when I first bought my house here in Vegas, 92, I had to get a 9% rate at that time.
Yeah.
Thank goodness it was on the high side, and it actually over the years actually dropped down. I was able to refinance, and get every 2% I could drop the one, refinance and get that money back. And it worked out well for me, but now we're in kind of like that credit swing up again. That again, I'm not an expert on that kind of stuff, but I've been around long enough. I see the cycles, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So to our listeners and viewers out there, do you have anything more to add on how we can promote unions? Just in your, we're so happy to have you here. I mean, you've had a lifelong career of success and helping people and protecting people's jobs. I think it's just great, Steve. I think it's just amazing. do you have anything else you want to say to our listeners and viewers right now that are wondering to union or not to union, I guess?
Well, probably the best thing to do is just start doing some research on it. You know, everybody's got a computer in their pocket, and you can actually look at some of the stuff, look what it takes to form a union, and see if that's something you want to get involved in. And it's the involving part. You know, we have problems with, you know, people thinking that the leadership is the union. The leadership is not the union. It's the people out there every day busting their butt to put food on their table, you know, put food on the table, to get their kids through school, that kind of stuff. Those are the people that are the union. It's not the leadership. The leadership is just there as your representative. So I would encourage everybody to get involved. You don't have to put your whole life into it unless you start to want to do that. And it's a really, I hate to use the word rewarding, but it's hard work to be a union leader, but it is worth every minute that you spend on it. You meet a lot of good people. You get a lot of people that were wronged by a company back to work when they should never have been fired. You know, if they followed a rule, a lot of times when you know, the company will say, well, you broke this rule, and then you actually have the investigation and you represent these people, and you can prove that, hey, they followed this rule, so you wrongfully dismissed them. And that is the greatest victories you can ever get, is to get somebody back and get their livelihood back.
That's amazing, man. I love your lifelong fight for workers' protection. I love that you loved it. You love doing it. You loved helping people out. And I think that you absolutely can call that rewarding, you know, to prevent a wrongful termination in some cases or something like that. Steve, you're the man, buddy. And if anyone doesn't know, Steve is an amazing bowler, by the way. I know that's for a fact. Like, he's a shark. Don't just like go up and start having drinks with, you know, old Steve here at the bowling alley, dude. He will kick your ass. He's a hell of a bowler. Sorry, I had to release that and give us a little inside scoop, man. Love you, buddy. Been I can't even remember how long we've been friends, but it was an absolute honor to have you on our show. Thanks for coming on here, talking about workers' protection. And for all of you who don't know, and you're a TikTok user, see at ScrapIron01. He's tearing it up. He's enjoying his retirement. We just absolutely love you, Steve. Thanks for coming on. Jared, do you have anything else?
No, I think this is a great episode. You know, and I think, you know, like Steve was saying, more people need to do the research, right? Figure out if the union thing is something that you want to pursue. And if so, either form one or reach out to one that's already there, right? And hopefully they can represent you and have a better living wage for you and your family. So thanks, Steve, again.
I appreciate the invite. I really do. This was a new thing for me. And one of the things I've always liked to do in my life is say yes a few times when people ask you to do something. So I appreciate you guys asking me to do this.
We appreciate you coming on.
That was
awesome. Thank you so much.
Steve Leyshon, everybody, thank you for joining us here at Common X Podcast with Jared and Ian. Stand up for yourselves, get some workers' protection, or if anything, like Steve said, get out there, do the research, check it out. Love you guys.
Common X with Jared and Ian. I mean, there's got to be a common sense approach to this. I mean, right?
Generation X has been quiet for way